wanted, because we didn't have the necessary policy and other input frameworks such as market, credit, infrastructures, you needed to then, ended up being scaled down to a level where all those inputs could be managed effectively. Things like transport and credit, extension, agricultural, community involvement. And that's where we started seeing we obtained the results. And so what we wanted on this was looking at where the programs were most successful was where they were able to respond to the diversity of the constraints and motivations affecting people's interactions with the environment. And where they were the least successful is where they didn't really see this integration. And so programs were also affected by a changing balance in nature, health, wealth, and power. So I want to take this next slide to kind of show what that meant for the mission. And so when we first started for the US government, you had an equal, more or less equal type of balance between these four different sectors. But then what happened due to differing reasons, some of it was structural adjustments, some of them were changes on the Washington side, is you had economic growth, that focus became smaller, governance became smaller, and then we had, for a long time, we had nature and health, but then that were the two main pillars, and then with the recent political crisis, nature program, the environment program was suspended, and now the Madagascar program, in terms of US government input, is focused exclusively on health and humanitarian assistance. And that is the program now in Madagascar, pending resolution of the political situation. So other elements that were that impeded progress was basically the periodic political crises, governments sweeping in and out, the impact of interventions undermined by not good enough governance, rampant, I had talked about corruption, weak civil society, and increased illegal exploitation. So the bottom line is that despite these notable successes, we still have lost 2 million hectares. There's been improvements in livelihoods, but they have been modest at best, and the population growth continues at 3%. And so today the country has 9 million people and 9 million hectares of forest and 20 million people. So as we're looking forward now, building on these lessons, what can we tell not for Madagascar, but for all of us that are trying to do good, sustainable development? Despite kind of how we ended, their political situation aside, Madagascar has some very valuable lessons about how to really operationalize, and we really made some real progress in moving forward in this front. And I think that what coming out of this, I mean, this is, I would have to say, is from my perspective, and I think many of our perspectives, is the important that, as I had said at the beginning, that environment is cross-cutting. That to really ensure an integrated, holistic approach, there has to be effective programmatic links at the country level between environment and the other focuses. And so as you're looking at the current US government initiatives, there are numerous ones that are there. And so you have Feed the Future, of which you really need to, how can you optimize this within an ecosystem approach that takes into account land use planning to better plan and make those linkages. In terms of global health, there's a lot of environmental determinants that are very important. And that a healthy, as I said at the beginning, if you don't have a healthy family, how can they be good stewards of the land? Water for the poor. I think that's the one that always is the most obvious, the natural linkages between ecosystems, human health, water, and sanitation programs. And good governance, that if you don't have that good governance at the community level, right at the level, down there at the level, to motivate local people to sustainably manage their resources. And I think we've got some really good examples on each of these in Madagascar that if people have specific questions I could respond to. And also on humanitarian assistance. I think David mentioned this, to respond to cyclone, droughts, and other natural disasters. You have to be looking at the resiliency of the ecosystems. If not, you're just going to be in a vicious circle, and it's always going to be responding more in a mode of humanitarian assistance. But I also think it's important as you look at those linkages that at a country level, you have to place these initiatives within that kind of strategic framework at the country level, within the political, economic, and cultural context. And that you need to be responsive to that context. and that this fostering of cross-sectorial cooperation, that the U.S. government, the conservation, the development organization, we can't do it alone. No one person can do it alone. So you need to look at that cooperation. You need to coordinate those investments with other multilaterals and engage private sector. As again, I think you had mentioned the importance of that, and that's one thing we've been doing, particularly with the mining sector in Madagascar. But also you need, at the field level, that there's that common long-term vision and that land use plan that people agree upon, that they sit down at a communal level and they agree on how that land is going to be used. That the technical approaches that we're introducing have been tested, and I think we have now behind us 20 years, not only in Madagascar, but other places in Africa where those different technical approaches, are we taking that, are we doing the analysis and moving forward? And that there is this artificial distinction between, and that you've got to move beyond this environment, economic growth, that they are linked, and we have to link them at all levels. And I think I've already mentioned talking about good governance. Yes, it's painstaking, yes, it's time-consuming, but it's fundamental for lasting results. And so what are the opportunities for implementing? I, again, cannot emphasize enough the balance at the country level between the different activities in terms of nature, wealth, health, and power. But I also think you need incentives to do this kind of programming, and a recognition that sustainable progress is slow, and therefore we should be looking in a context of 10 to 20-year horizon rather than 5-year. But also we need to look at what are the appropriate strategies that need to be in those countries with strong U.S. government interests, such as biodiversity, security, humanitarian concerns, where governments are fragile, and that is the case of Madagascar. Now, what I might do at this point is perhaps maybe take some questions. I have 2 more slides, which is bringing us back to Madagascar. And I would like to close on these slides, but what might be good is talking about both in terms of short-term actions and long-term actions of kind of what's next in Madagascar, because I don't want to leave everyone hanging, you know, okay, now what's next? So I would like to present these, but maybe what might be good is to talk about the concepts of really what Madagascar, that the program represents. And then kind of as closing, I will share those last 2 slides, which really talk about now where do we go in terms of Madagascar. If that sounds good? Yeah, it's a little bit of a shift to... Perfect. Okay.
Thank you, Lisa. I just want to take the opportunity to thank some of our partners in the audience. And Karen, if you can come up and join the panel, and Karen and Lisa and David will answer questions. But I'm happy to see USAID here in the room, Tim Resch from the Africa program. Thank you for your insights in pulling together a 25-year perspective on Madagascar and giving us an opportunity to pull together this forum and our partners to talk about Madagascar. Really appreciate that. Natalie Bailey from the Africa Biodiversity Conservation Group that many of the conservation groups are a partner of. Thank you for coming. We appreciate all of your support and guidance. And I want to thank the International Conservation Caucus co-chairs who have been instrumental in putting together these forums for the foundation. I know we had some staff here earlier who had to depart a little bit earlier, but it's wonderful to have Congressman Royce, Hal Rogers, who's the new chair of the House Appropriations Committee, John Tanner, who's retiring, and Norm Dix, who's on Appropriations, be our House caucus chairs. And in the Senate, Senator Snow, Senator Tom Udall, and Senator Whitehouse, along with their retiring Senator Brownback, as our conservation-specific members of Congress that really promote forums on these types of conversations. And again, to see WWF, Conservation International, the Nature Conservancy, no, you're not in Madagascar, thank you, for coming and supporting dialogues on these important conservation and development issues. I'd like to open up the floor for questions from our audience. So if folks just want to raise your hand, let me know. We've got our experts here ready and able. Well, perhaps I'll kick it off with a simple question. I hope not too complicated. We'll warm up the room. In Lisa's presentation, she talked a little bit about a pivotal point in the development of Madagascar where they chose to scale down rather than scale up. I'd love to hear
results?
Had we not scaled down, we wouldn't have gotten any results, because you could not implement the types of projects we had without being able to control other factors in the surrounding environment, such as was there adequate transport, were there sufficient seeds for people to even be able to plant. The government didn't have an agricultural service. They weren't providing seeds. So therefore, if you wanted to have success, the projects themselves had to provide those seeds. Is that the ideal scenario of how it would have worked? Absolutely not. But had we not done that, we wouldn't have gotten any results at all. And so I think the aim was to at least consolidate what we could and get results on a small scale. So the ideal scenario would have been to take those very good results and scale them up to get it on a larger scale. So I think that it was a necessary strategy given the very weak government and the lack of positive context for some of the activities that we were trying to do.
And maybe I can just add to that, that one of the things at that time period, and we're really talking about this time of kind of the last, kind of the last 5 years, this is really where, if you looked at 3 different segments of the environment program, the last 3 years was really where it would move to scaling up. And one of the things was there were these communal development plans, these regional development plans, and which we thought were great. There would be a great opportunity to look at how these different elements come together within at a communal level and regional level. And so what we were also wanting to show is that an example of where it really worked well, of how, and then that could be duplicated. And unfortunately, I think also you have a political crisis. I think a lot of the impeding factors of what we were saying is also, those were never saw fruition, and you never actually, there's always really, from my perspective, I also served as president of the donor group for 5 years, and every donor comes in with their kind of their silo, and it's oftentimes, and it was very frustrating for Malagasy at the regional level of how can you have a holistic program when, you have the funding coming in from different sources. And so it did end up maybe someone was doing a road there, but not really the road where you needed to do it. So it's again coming together at that planning stage that then could allow that scaling up. And you need to have a government that also works with you. You can't do it alone. And so I think it's not having that framework and that structure. And I think we were moving in that direction. But then there was the political crisis.
Great. And Vanessa?
I was wondering, so with the presidential policy directive, we see this new emphasis on country ownership. There's some debate on if country ownership means government ownership or more whole of society ownership. And it sounds like with the example that you're providing, when you have a case of a weak government, this more broader definition is really necessary in order to get results. So I was wondering if you talk some more about those partnerships that you made with local civil society and how they were important for the successes of the program.
I was actually going to, I can answer that, but I wanted to ask Daniela, who's worked a lot on those kind of issues, if you could respond to that. I know that that's something, I think it's good to, the wealth of people in here, if I don't put you on the spot too much.
No, that's fine. I think the question is pertinent on multiple scales. I think if I understand the question correctly, you're referring primarily to the national scale. So that, ownership by national government. In the face of weak national government, then you have sort of other parties that come together in a coalition to provide that overarching strategy and kind of a unifying force to move things forward. I think in the case of Madagascar, we had actually both during a certain period of time. There was a stronger government let's say 5 years ago, that was working hand in hand with this donor group that Lisa chaired. And so having that joint committee that was made up of both national government representatives and a donor group that was really coming together regularly to agree strategy and discuss approaches and address issues where there may have been either redundancies or conflicts, and that was really key at the national scale. At the local scale, I think what we saw and continue to see is that in the face of weak or, in some cases you could argue really no governance on the government side, you have local civil society organizations, be they, spurred from kind of farmer associations or water user committees or fishermen's associations, that those those groups come together and emerge as the central governance power that then are able to mobilize and accomplish things that they weren't initially established to do. So one example would be, a fishermen's association that was set up primarily to manage fisheries, but then once they were organized as such, was able to lobby kind of the regional representative of the Ministry of Health to get improved healthcare service, to get more healthcare professionals coming to the area, or other examples like that.
So you'll see when we talk about what we do in the short term, given this weak, fragile government, I think we really are looking at the emergence of civil society and all the work we did with, I would say, more local communities. I mean, the question of what is civil society, I think, is always that definition, but really local communities and the roles that they're trying to play now, in a situation where the government is not enforcing the laws and are not doing it. And so that emergence, it is very important. And all of the processes that were done during those years of the communal development plans regional were very participatory. It was not just the government allowing country ownership, really was seen in that larger definition.
Thank you. I want to be mindful of everyone's time and invite Lisa to come up for her remaining remarks and her look forward, and then John Canton can close out the briefing right on the hour.
I think you do have one. Okay, so this actually, fits in a little bit, this next slide. So kind of what are we looking at now? I mean, you have a situation where you do have a fragile state in Madagascar. You have all funding has been suspended except for humanitarian assistance, but we have an increase in illegal logging to the tune of $200 million of rosewood went out to China last year, of which and so in face of that, you do have a population who are living on these forest edge that are being threatened by lack of food security, and they're not part of the existing humanitarian program because those regions were very honestly that's where all the environment program worked in those, and those are the ones that are then being those local communities are the ones that we've been working with. And so we're continuing to try and work with those. But I think what you really need to do is to make sure we continue to focus support on those communities during this period of this fragile time period. And re-securing their legal access to the natural resources and rebuilding their livelihoods. And that's really what the conservation organizations are doing right now in Madagascar. And sometimes it's in partnerships with development organizations that are also there if they're working in that area. But it's really trying not to lose the trust of those local communities and to make sure that they have livelihoods and that they're not tempted to then go and be paid off to cut down the trees. But it's a tall order. But this is something that we feel is not being currently addressed in Madagascar in terms of from an environmental perspective. So that's kind of the short term of things that need to be done now to make sure that we don't lose all the gains and that confidence of communities around those critical biodiverse areas. In the longer term, and I think you will find Karen's report very interesting. If you kind of read, she kind of talks about 3 scenarios. I've actually here taken the middle road scenario, which is really, I think, long term when the political crisis is resolved in a satisfactory level, that international community can come back in and provide funding, that you will need longer term, larger and more sustained interventions if we really are going to allow the country to take off and to really reach the tipping point and ensure the long-term protection of its unique biodiversity. I mean, that's just the reality, and it again will, I think we've proven, and I think, I've been there now 28 years and I've seen all people come and go and all sorts of different, but I think from the beginning we always said that, this balance between environment, health, economic growth, and governance is key, and I don't think that has not changed despite any other changes and ups and downs. And so that despite the current political instability, I really believe that we should continue to use Madagascar as an important model for the U.S. government on how to operationalize a comprehensive, holistic, integrated approach to development. And not just think about Madagascar as kind of out there, as got in political turmoil, but it really has a model. We operationalized it, we all work, and there's many of us that can share, many of us that are, can share what we learned and how we move that forward. And I think that's what's really important, and that's a role Madagascar can play right now too, in terms of helping further work in moving forward that thing. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to our Madagascar example. And it's something I really think that all of us believe very strongly, and we certainly hope that the country will get to a point that it will be able to be back on a full path to sustainable development. So thank you.